practice of eating communally out of a basket was one which, before the famine, would have been really widespread and actually continued to be widespread long after and right up to the first half of the 20th century and within living memory even. So the idea was that you'd boil your potatoes in your pot, and then you'd strain them, and you'd strain them and keep them in the basket in which they were strained, which was a usually round, flat basket of various different sizes called a skib. And here we have a skib with potatoes in it. And in the middle of it, if you were making butter, for example, the byproduct of butter making is buttermilk. So you'd have your noggin in the middle of the basket, and everybody would sit round it, crouched, and dip their potatoes into the buttermilk and eat them with their fingers. So the whole meal would be shared around the noggin of buttermilk in the middle. Or instead of a noggin of buttermilk, you might have a little bit of salt herring with some water on it, which would be a sort of salty dip or kitchen. And that was the typical centrepiece for the potato meal. So it was a communal meal. And then it was all taken away and washed up and put away when you weren't eating. So the noggin's a very important centrepiece, and the pot, of course, is essential for everything, for heating water, and the skib was actually used for other things as well. And it would be easy to wash and then simply dry in the sun or the wind or the rain outside afterwards. So Topham is an English artist who visits the west of Ireland in the 1840s, and we've got quite a lot of his paintings, and it's very interesting to see them. So he shows this arrangement of people ready to eat, sitting, crouching, just about to eat this meal, and you can see the noggin in the middle. Then there are various other images of this. The 1844 watercolour is the first. It's really amazing to have that first picture. And then you've got a photograph which turned up quite recently from 1915 of a family sitting outside a Galway cabin, we think, and doing the same thing. The children are eating out of the basket, probably with their grandmother. So that's really interesting to see how similar those two images are in the two different centuries. And then there are various other images and many, many descriptions. And so there's a nice watercolour by a woman called Livesey, who painted two interiors in Mayo in the 1870s. And Livesey's images show byre dwellings with families with animals living under the same roof as the family. And she has a nice picture of this woman sitting, eating potatoes out of a little tiny basket next to the fire with her fingers. And she's also got another little skib, rather decrepit looking one, propped up nearby the door, and various little stools just like the ones that I've brought in, which the stools themselves were important. They allowed you to crouch low beneath the pall of smoke, which would have been quite common in a little cabin, sometimes with the chimney blocked up in order to retain heat. And these stools were made in a way that the legs could be replaced and renewed if they wore down. They had honest construction, which meant that the legs were staked into the seat. So the stools were really important. There'd be more stools than chairs in most households, very few chairs if you were poor. And then the larger relative of the noggin is the piggin. So this is the noggin, it's small, it holds a pint, but a piggin might be much bigger. It's like today's bucket. So you go and milk your cow with your piggin, and the woman will milk the cow and then carry the piggin home full of milk. She'd usually carry it on her head, and she'd have a head ring to rest it. So these women were observed carrying piggins around, and then the piggin would be also used for water or anything else for liquid. So carrying water into the house, you'd use a piggin in the 1840s. And then another coopered vessel made in the same way as the noggin and the piggin is the keeler. And the keeler was used also for making butter, but it would have been very useful for washing clothes. It was a closed tub. It was a multi-purpose vessel that was used for anything that you needed to use liquids for straining your potatoes and catching water as well. And then there's an interesting little object, which is probably one that would be overlooked and probably doesn't survive, which is something that we found on the Aran Islands, recorded in the 1940s. and it's like a little stripped down Christmas tree really, just with a few branches left sticking out, and it hangs by its tip, and it would have hung against the back wall of the hearth near the warmth of the turf fire, and you'd put your children's clothes on it to dry. So it was called a thistle because of its appearance, but it's basically it's a sort of twiggy branch that you're hanging up very, very close to the warmth of the hearth for drying clothes, or maybe storing clothes as well.